Hey, how you doing? Thanks for coming on.
Of course, anytime. And it has been probably the busiest last 2 weeks of my life. So doing
Y-
well otherwise.
Yeah, that's hard these days. I'm glad. Yeah, no, I imagine so. For those watching who don't know, this is Erin Reed, the author of Erin in the Morn, the it's essentially like the primary resource where I get basically any news involving trans issues in the United States. So we're kind of going to a primary source here. I'm sort of making myself irrelevant, I think, which is not the best business strategy. But I did want to talk with you because, well, as you said, you have been having a very busy 2 weeks.
Yes, yes, it has been very busy. In the aftermath of the election, there have been a lot of stories to report on, a lot of things to come out. And, it doesn't stop. I've tracked legislation for 3 to 4 years now. And just yesterday, Texas filed 32 anti-trans bills on their very first day in session.
Yeah. All of which I assume are absolutely necessary and symptomatic of their deep commitment to improve the lives of Texans, cis
Of
and
course,
trans.
yes, yes.
So there's basically like a limitless number of topics that we could discuss. There's no limit to how much trans issues are going to be made the center of attention as the Republicans desperately scapegoat as their policies fail to improve anyone's lives. But there's one set of questions that I've been getting like really consistently, and it's from people in my audience who are trans, who have trans friends or trans family members, and they're essentially asking, what can we do like in preparation for the coming administration? I know that you keep and you update like a kind of risk map on the United States, like which states are the most Hitlerite when it comes to acceptance of trans people, the likelihood of negative bills being passed in the future, hate crime watch, that sort of thing. Obviously everything's gotten a lot worse since the last time I checked the updated map, so I know you're an expert on this. I wanted to talk to you about it. Do you, I assume you get this question all the time, essentially, like, what do we do?
Yeah, yeah. So the entire impetus for making my map was about 3 years ago, whenever all of this was really just starting. I started getting messages from parents basically asking, what do I do? And trans people that are in college asking, what do I do? What state do I go to? Where am I safe? Am I safe here? Where should I move? And at the time, whenever I'd made my map, the landscape was very different. If you were to look at my map now, you would see that it's very heavily dark red, meaning that these are states that have passed some of the most draconian of regulations targeting transgender people. Uh, a long time ago, it was all light red and blue. And so just to explain basically the use of this map and like the things that go into making it. As a transgender person, if I am traveling, if I'm driving on the road from the East Coast to the West Coast, there are a number of paths that I can take. And some of those paths might bring me into places where if I use the bathroom at a rest stop, I could get sued for $10,000 or more, as in the case of Odessa, Texas, for instance. If I go to a library or if I get stopped and pulled over and I have a driver's license that has a gender marker that's different from my assigned sex at birth, you have places like Florida that have said that that could be fraud, criminal fraud. And so this map essentially helps people navigate the complex reality that we as trans people now face, where we have to constantly think about where it is safe for us to exist and which ways do we need to protect ourselves in these states and more. I'll give you one really good example. Whenever we're flying from one state to another, I now choose my airport based on some of the laws in the state. So, for instance, Utah passed a law that says that if I use the same bathroom that I've been using for years, I could be, arrested because my birth certificate is not allowed to be changed because Louisiana does not allow for birth certificate changes. Like I said, it gets really, really complicated really fast. And my whole goal is to help people navigate those complexities. Now, to answer the other part of your question is we're talking about this in the context of an election where we just saw $215 million spent essentially demonizing transgender people, making you so afraid of people like me that you're willing to throw away anything else that you care about. And I don't know if the ads moved anything or if they changed anything, but they won. The Republican Party won, and now we have to deal with the ramifications of that. And so, yes, we know what's being planned on day one. We know, for instance, that They're going to start investigating the manufacturers of gender affirming care medications, the medications that many of us rely on. They're going to start trying to make it so that nobody can change their driver's license. It doesn't matter which state that you're in. And again, these bathroom bans are expected to flourish.
I mean, apparently they're going to be passing one in Congress soon if Rep. Nancy Mace gets her way.
So I actually want to hit on that really quickly. I want everybody to realize what is happening right now in Congress with the targeting of Sarah McBride. Because if you watch Sarah McBride, if you follow Sarah McBride, she's a milquetoast Democrat. You know, she's very mainline. She's
not like a crazy progressive. Yeah.
Like, exactly. You know, she's not the kind of person who I think most people would put up as like, this is like, oh, radical left wing trans or something like that. That's not her sort of MO. And her entire legislative history, like the things that she has done, she was the one responsible for instance, the paid family leave law in Delaware. She was the first one to manage to get that across the line after they had tried to push that across the line for decades. And so the idea that somebody like her is too dangerous for women in bathrooms. If somebody like her is too dangerous, then that means everybody is. That means that we are all too dangerous. They are going after her for a reason. They know that she's not a good target. They know that she's not their prime person who they would put up for this. But if they win at this, if they succeed at getting Congress to exclude her, to segregate her from the bathrooms that she's been using for most of her life, then they can do it to anybody. They can do it to everybody.
It's the reason why assimilationist rhetoric has always been nonsense. Anyone who would attack like a crazy blue-haired, Folsom Fair attending such and such transgender person from using the restrooms they identify with will then go on to do so for people like Sarah McBride or anyone. There's never, like, towing the line of acceptability has never succeeded in actually like winning over the majority. You have to, it's all or nothing essentially.
Well, right. And like, I think one of the points that I often make is that you cannot compromise away hate. You can't negotiate it away. Like we knew from the beginning, and I knew because I've been tracking the laws. So I had a really good on the ground sort of bird on the ground view of this, but we know that like it was never about sports. It was never about kids. Like the very first laws that were targeting transgender people were targeting sports. They were targeting sports in Kentucky. They launched ads against Andy Bashir. Those ads failed, but the strategy stuck. And what they ended up doing was they passed sports bans in 18 states. And I can tell you that as somebody that was tracking those bans, there were moderate Republicans and even moderate Democrats that were like, we can just let this one through and we're not going to pass the gender affirming care ban, or we're not going to pass
these are the edge cases, who care
exactly.
Like this. And people are still saying that in the wake of Kamala Harris's defeat. There are still people saying like, why are we like dying on the hill of trans participation in sports in high schools? And the answer to that, of course, is because it literally will never stop there. Even, I mean, to like draw a parallel, I think that you essentially like described the framework of when you began speaking about like essentially sundown states. Now trans people driving to make sure their route doesn't get them in an area where we're talking about like sundown towns basically, or at least the same fundamental logic. And it's important to remember that back in the post-war period, when during the Jim Crow laws, a lot of the segregationist policies on a local level were described in exactly the same, like, okay, maybe equal rights, but white women don't feel comfortable sharing the same restrooms as black women. They did that, like word for word, exactly the same. Those strategies haven't persisted in race relations to the same extent, but it shows how there's always this effort to normalize bigotry by putting one foot in the door. Maybe no further, but there's always further. You give a bigot an inch, they will always take a mile.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's something that's a lesson that I think we have learned, or at least we have attempted to learn as a nation many times. And it's one that we're learning again right now. I don't know what the right way to beat it is. I don't know how you push it back, except for showing that we are human beings. We have lives just like you. We want to do the same things. We have the same dreams. We want to just live in peace. And what I do, my role, the way that I view what I do is I tell our stories. So that way, when these things happen, I may not be able to get into Congress and change Nancy Mace's heart. I may not be able to get into Congress and make a plea for the dignity of Sarah McBride or for all transgender people. But what I do hope that I'm able to do is explain to people the toll that this takes, is to show the humanity and the lack thereof at play here. And it is my hope that, as we have done many times before, that we'll push out the hate. And you know, I've got to keep that hope alive.
I mean, I do believe, and it's terribly liberal of me. I do subscribe to the belief that, you know, the arc of history is long but curves in the direction of justice. I do subscribe to that belief. So hopefully, give it enough time. It doesn't seem like the anti-trans advocacy from the Republican Party has done that much to motivate all but the most militant of Trump supporters. Most of the normie Trump supporters seem to be people who are caught up on things like inflation or like massive systemic change, you know, or perceived systemic change. Obviously, I don't think they're right to believe that. And not so much caught up on the trans issue. It's kind of like with gay marriage, where Republican politicians are largely anti-gay marriage, but Republican voters are at the very least not as concerned about it as they were like a decade ago. That's the hope, at least. I want to say, because this is the main thing I get, and I don't feel qualified to answer these. I've got like best guesses, you know, when people ask me these questions, but I've gotten a lot of emails and people in chat where they say, you know, I'm trans. What do I do now? Should I move from a red state to a blue state? Should I stay in the closet? Should I go back in the closet, having already gotten out of it? DIY HRT. Should I stockpile, like, should I have a bucket full of estrogen in my garage that I just keep for safekeeping? You know, what do I do to prepare for what's coming? And I'm sure you get questions like this all the time. So I was curious in your perspective.
I do. And, you know, for your listeners who are not trans or who don't know of a trans person, I would invite them to imagine the sort of preparations that we have to make, the plans that we have to make, and the things that we have to consider. The fact that there are people that are even considering having to stockpile their medication or buy it online and hide it in fear that their medication is going to somehow be like criminally prosecutable or something like that. These are things that we have to live with. And the idea that, you know, some transgender people have to map out Starbucks along their routes in some states just so that they know where they can have gender neutral bathrooms. Like, these are the realities that transgender people face. Now, what do I suggest that people do? I actually have an article specifically on this where I speak about a lot of things that I think transgender people should do in the immediate term. You know, we still have 2 months until Trump actually gets inaugurated into office. And there are things that Biden put into place that we can take advantage of right now that can potentially protect us from harm later. So, for instance, one of the first things that I suggest to people is to get your passport. And I'm actually not suggesting that in order to flee the country, although that is something that is nice to have if you ever do need to leave. But that's not the reason why I'm suggesting that people get their passports. The reason why I'm suggesting it is because Biden made it so that when you get your passport and when you change your passport, you can easily change your gender marker. And to have a federal document that has your gender marker that's going to be good for 10 years means that you might be able to get by 1, 2, even 2.5 terms of various presidential administrations. I say this because one of the first things that I think Trump is going to do when he takes power is he's going to sign a barrage of executive orders. And one of those executive orders is going to be to remove the ability to change your gender marker on passports. So that's one thing. Another thing is to change it at the Social Security office, which is something that a lot of people don't realize, that we have a Social Security gender marker. And it is that gender marker that often gets referenced by a lot of other laws. And so if they ever decide to use that in order to target transgender people, it would be nice to have that changed as well. The third thing that I do suggest is to talk to your doctor about maintaining medication supplies. There are legal ways that you could potentially do so. For instance, I know some transgender people have been advised that it is okay to use their hormone therapy vials for longer than the label implies. And that is something that, you know, listen to your doctor on that front. The other thing that I've seen is that, you know, people have been driven to perhaps get their medication from Canada. We know people that have crossed the border to get medication, similar to how it used to be a long time ago with other medications and how it still is in some ways. Another thing that I also suggest is to, if you are planning on making a move, if you've got, you know, plans in place to make a move, I would start considering, you know, acting on those plans. And I want to preface this by saying that I am not suggesting or recommending or telling people that they have to leave their state, because Number one, that would be cruel to say, given the fact that most people do not have the resources to up and leave. And secondarily, many transgender people want to stay and fight. They want to stay because they love their home. I know people who live in Florida, who have lived in Florida through some of the worst of the DeSantis administration, who have been targeted directly by that administration, who are still there because that's their home and they want to take care of it. That being said, every person has their own calculus here. And I do expect laws to get harsher in these states, especially after a Trump administration no longer pushes back at all. And when the Supreme Court rules that we don't have equal protection. So looking into those plans in moving, getting your state documents up and in order. One thing that I expect the Trump administration to do is to use the Real ID law to mandate that transgender people have their assigned sex at birth on their driver's licenses. And this is something that we saw in Florida recently. Florida just recently took a similar measure to mandate that gender actually means assigned sex at birth, even though it's not defined anywhere in Florida code to mean that. And so Trump could easily do the same. And so if you update your driver's license now, you might have that driver's license for 4 to 8 years, and then you can perhaps hold tight while things blow over.
Passport goes for 10, which
passport goes for 10.
Pardon me for being optimistic, but I genuinely doubt a political movement this deliberately maliciously incompetent can hold on for 10 years in a meaningful sense. I'd like to believe at least that it will collapse and burn before then. So, am I write out the whole administration if things go well? One of the biggest pieces of advice that I've been trying to offer people, because it's kind of catch-all and unlike a lot of very personal advice, it's relatively low risk, is it's so important to get to know your neighbors in times of like increasing political turmoil, whether your neighbors are sympathetic to you politically or even if they're kind of not, as long as they're not openly hostile. So much of the terror of being a persecuted minority is the terror of being alone. You're in your house, but the moment you leave your front door, you're in a void where anything and everything can happen. And you can really kind of expand that free space, I think, by getting to know the people around you, making sure you have someone nearby who can help you out if something happens to you. You need to have your pet covered or something, your house managed, being like the thing they want, really, because they're not going to, expend the effort, I think, to turn this into a full open persecutorial program with camps and everything. In all likelihood, they want trans people to go back in the closet. I mean, that they want to force everyone medically detransition, get the markers removed from all of your documents, and go back to living a normal life. And it becomes much easier to force people to do that when they live alone, effectively. So getting to know people and maybe sort of winning over sympathies that you might not expect politically, but will get interpersonally, I think it goes a long way towards making you feel less alone.
Yeah. And I think that was a really excellent point, because one thing that I often say to people who are reporting on these issues or who want to know more about what things are like on the ground is that there's a reason why these laws are being passed right now. And it's not because people hate us. It's not because all of a sudden there's this massive movement of hate targeting transgender people. It's actually the reverse. It's because we are finding more acceptance in our communities now than ever before. And I think that threatens some people. I think that there are people in power who feel threatened at the fact that we are now more present. We are now able to be ourselves. For a long time, it was impossible to transition. They didn't need laws to target us because society did that for them. And right now, I don't think that we're getting that. I can say that even in states like Florida, where we have seen the harshest laws targeting transgender people, there was a bathroom ban that threatened trans people with arrest for using the bathroom that doesn't match your assigned sex at birth. And as far as I know, from my reporting and speaking to people on this, there's not been a single person arrested under that law yet. And the reason for that is because nobody wants to enforce it. Nobody wants to be the bathroom police. Nobody wants to stand outside of a bathroom and arrest or check the genitals of any trans person that walks into the bathroom or any cis person that walks into the bathroom. And I think that's an important point. Whenever we talk about knowing your neighbors, finding your friends, and even speaking to people who you would not expect to be allies, I think that this prevalence of support that we do have and the ability to be ourselves means that we will find that community if we look for it. I do strongly encourage people to look for community, to find community, because every other fight that we have ever had around this issue and other issues as well has only succeeded because our allies also stood up with us. Now is a time to make those allies, to form those alliances, to find those people who want to help you and to give them a chance to.
I completely agree. And I sometimes I get flack for this because maybe it comes across as a bit invalidating or overly optimistic, which I don't intend it to be at all. But I really do think that for a majority, not all of them, but a majority of people who say vote Republican, their ire towards trans people is done in this abstracted, like, wokeness, like gender grooming, they're teaching our kids whatever. It has to be wrapped up in this whole bundle of narratives. But on an interpersonal level, I have personally known multiple Republicans who have been like, oh yeah, I don't think that should be taught in schools, but I've got like a trans cousin and they're all right. They just want to live their life, They did the exact same thing with gay people, and that was one of the reasons why gay marriage went from being legal basically nowhere to being legal all over the entire country, like relatively speaking, in basically no time at all, which is because there was this wave that came along with the visibility of gay people, which turned into begrudging acceptance, even from people who were still like politically not in favor of gay marriage. And I think that process is basically impossible to undo. I mean, outside of like massive, like we're talking, Weimar levels of social regression. I think that for the most part, trans people are kind of, not just here to stay in a literal sense, but like socially speaking, there's no unweaving them from the fabric. And the best shot Republicans have at doing that is by making them feel isolated, self-isolating. They remove themselves from the fabric. They stay in the closet. They go quiet. And then the job's done. The work's over. They don't have to do anything anymore. They've already saved themselves the effort.
So I want to highlight that because I think that, it is impossible. They did this too late. They reacted to transgender people coming out a little too late. No matter what they do, the cat's out of the bag. Like, I remember whenever I was young, whenever I was, 12 years old, and I knew I was trans. I had my online little community. I had my little GeoCities website with a fantastic pink and black aesthetic a long time ago. But I remember that like it was hard to find other people like me. And it was hard to discover that like there was a name for what I was and that I could do this. But now, I mean, the knowledge is there. You can't put the knowledge away. And as long as there exist transgender people, and as long as that knowledge exists in American society and in global society, it is going to be impossible to force us all back into the closet. There are too many of us. We are now part of the world, of civilization. Like, we are here. And then the other side of that, the other thing that I'll mention is that, there is more support from people who you would not expect it to come from. I remember in the aftermath of my fiance, Representative Zoe Zephyr, out of Montana's censure off of the Montana House floor. Many of your viewers will remember she stood up, raised the microphone after they silenced her. Whenever we were driving to Glacier National Park, we pulled over to look at this beautiful overlook, and right behind us pulled in this big F-250. And three guys get out. They're all in like camo, and they have a look to them, and they walk up to us. And one of the guys looks at Zoe and says, "Are you Zoe Zephyr?" And Zoe's like, "Yes, I am." And he goes, "Well, I'm a Republican." It's like, I could have guessed that, but I'm a Republican. But I want to let you know, I would have sat on that bench for you. It's wrong what they did to you.
No kidding.
And like, it was, and I saw it, I witnessed it. And it was just, it's in those moments that you realize that like, I don't think that most people have hate in their hearts. I think that people just, sometimes people don't understand. Sometimes people don't get it. But I think when they see it, when they see the wrong that's done, I have to believe that like that exists in far more than these three people in Montana's hearts.
It's one of the reasons why I'm excited about Sarah McBride entering Congress. Not for any specific like legislative reasons, really, for the aforementioned normie liberal reasons. But yeah, no, it's one of the reasons why people say, and I think this has also been accepted as a kind of like cringe liberal aphorism, despite being completely correct, which is that representation matters, the more you see of a group, the harder it is to hate that group. It's just, it is literally borne out in the science. The people who are most fearful of black people have basically never met one. It's just every demographic, every country, every dynamic, it keeps happening over and over again. And like you said, the acceptance of trans people was kind of kicked into motion too early for Republicans to respond with that kind of crushing weight of go back in the closet. It's too late now, I guess, and we're all better for it, really. I take it then that that is your implicit answer to the many questions that I get on whether or not people should go back in the closet or stay in the closet, which is to, don't let them win preemptively like that.
Yeah, I agree. That would be my answer to that. And on what you had just said, it is called the mere exposure effect, that if you see somebody, you are going to be more prone to accept people like them in the future. And in fact, the way that public opinion changed on gay people, happened in between 2003 to about 2016. It was the biggest public opinion shift in US history. If you had asked in 2003 if people agreed with gay marriage, you would have found around 70% said no, 30% said yes. And that flipped entirely within about 10 years. And, it's not that people, new people died and new people were born. And there wasn't, it's the people that were answering no changed their opinions. They changed their minds. And how did that happen? It happened because it was so much easier to hate on the gays than it was to hate your gay brother, your gay daughter, your gay friend. You got to know that there are people that exist in society that you love, that you like, that you care about, that are also gay. And that moves society along. It changes people. Whenever we look at Congress, I do think that representation matters. Whenever we look at legislatures, I do think that representation matters. And I think that with McBride, we're getting a crash course in that because, she's stepping in a moment where the Democratic Party is debating as to whether or not they should just drop transgender people. And they are now watching the Republican Party.
Sickening, by the way, I have to say, that like line of discourse after the election.
I know. But I think that what they're seeing now, I think might change things for them. I hope so. Because what they're seeing is a Republican Party that is so controlled by the far right that the mere existence of a transgender person as their equal drives them mad. It drives them into a frenzy. And I saw this with my fiance in Montana. I saw that the fact that whenever just her being in that building made them drop everything else because they're driven, frothing mad at her existence, at her just sitting there. And we see that now with Sarah McBride, somebody, again, who I mentioned earlier, is, for better or for worse, very normally liberal in a lot of ways. She espouses very mainline Democratic platform. She's not an offensive person. And to see them driven so mad at the fact that she could come in and be their equal, she could use the same bathrooms as them, she can walk through the same spaces as them, I think that will put on display that the cruelty does not have an end, but it also puts on display that she's just a normal person trying to live her life like everybody else, trying to represent 700,000 constituents in Delaware.
They did the exact same thing after the war. You had, I think, 3 black senators being elected, or 2 black senators being elected, and the entire other half of the Senate dropped everything to attack them nonstop. I mean, that was the birth of a. I mean, there's like period pieces from the time. It's insane. And I think, on a political level, I think it's representative of the fact that they have no plans to actually improve people's lives. Trans people are an amazing scapegoat. Like, Republicans offer nothing to Republican voters, just absolutely nothing. Maybe like corn subsidies if you're a corn farmer. Like, we're talking like an incredibly slim marginal fraction of the population gets anything. The rest of them get to suffer, or at best they get nothing. That's the best case scenario. That with what the tariffs are going to do to the economy, I don't think anyone's getting nothing in the coming 4 years. So they need to turn outwards. They need to blame. And it's one of the reasons why I think, like, after the election, the Democrats taking that bait, going, oh, yeah, the problem was we went too woke, even though Kamala Harris didn't mention trans people at all, didn't do anything even remotely progressive during the campaign. If anything, shifted rightward over time, campaigning with Lindsey McCain. Or Liz Cheney, Liz McCain, sorry, I mixed 2 people up with similar face shapes. And they still want to blame woke. And I think that's because they also don't really have a plan. So it's a nice twofer then, because in addition to reaffirming like the necessity of defending the rights of trans people, it's a really good litmus test for politicians who have nothing else to offer, like just void, absolutely, in terms of what they offer the American people.
It is. And this is sort of like a classic element of far right movements. Like we've seen many different movements, correctly identify problems in the sense that, like, working class problems and such, but then they offer a solution that is so disconnected from the actual solutions that would make those problems go away or those problems become easier by pointing at somebody who they say, if you hate them enough, then everything's going to change. The world is going to change and everything's going to be better for you. It's a classic fear campaign, and it's something that Trump has been effective at. He's been very good at getting people to hate and to fear people. And I think that right now, what we are seeing with attacks on trans people, but not just on trans people, on immigrants, on Muslims, on anybody that is different from a very myopic and narrow vision of what an American should be and who belongs in our society. He has convinced a sizable portion of the electorate that just hating on those people is going to make their problems go away. If we make those people go away, then your problems are going to go away. And I think that no matter what happens, and I was saying this before the election, no matter what happens, we live together with these people, and we are going to have to find a way to pull those people out of that hate. If Harris had won, we would still be dealing with $215 million of anti-trans ads and the repercussions of that and how we recover from that. And, I hope that this burns itself out quickly. I hope that people realize very quickly that there is not much that's going to be offered to them, and that hating a trans person or hating an immigrant is not going to make them better able to put bread on the table, is not going to make them better able to afford groceries or gas. Like, we have no ability to do that. And no matter how much you target, a transgender representative in Congress, it's not going to make life easier for the American people.
And overall, like, historical precedent is on our side. With regards to, say, gay marriage or acceptance of gay people, even though there's still a lot of homophobia in society, it's enshrined enough that as a Republican politician, you basically can't go around talking about how you want to revoke gay marriage. There's no mandate for it. I mean, maybe some people would agree with you. Maybe in like Oklahoma, you could get more than 50% of the population backing you on it. But altogether, not really that viable. And I really do think that within our lifetimes, we'll see basically that same social shift happen with trans people. There's always a blowback when it happens at first. I mean, the 1980s, the like great early period of aggressive, continuous gay activism was during the AIDS crisis and during the Reagan administration. And of course, they persisted and they won. In the long arc, they won completely, and now everyone's gay. It shouldn't be that long, really. Things move faster now, too, because of the internet, It's not just in America, either. Far-right movements are resurging all over the world, but it's kind of difficult to ignore the fact that when you see a lot of the far-right discourse, I mean, whether you see it translated from Russian Telegram chats, you see like AfD, guys from Germany talking about it, not only do they reflect a lot of the culture war talking points that we see over here in the States, but you also see that same contradiction where the talking points are done in response to the increased prominence of trans or gay or whatever people within their own society. Like, how many times have we seen like a prominent member of the queer community online turn out to be Russian? No matter how anti-gay or anti-trans you make a country, the people still exist and they find their ways to be influential. I don't know, I see that sometimes. It always like makes me feel a little optimistic that even somebody in like China or Russia or whatever, that they can express a kind of like social pull within the context of their own identity, in spite of every possible like political action being taken against them in their home country. It just speaks to an underlying truth or maybe like a power of, human perception that goes beyond what the law can control. And I think it's only going to go more in that direction over time.
I agree. And, I do want to point out that, yes, we are seeing some of the same far-right movements globally have the same targets: immigrants, Muslims, trans people. Like, these seem to be the fuel that a lot of these far right movements are trying to burn on. But you're right in that even in some of the most oppressive regimes, we still see transgender people, queer people, able to get their message out. And I do think that part of this is, the internet, and it's making it easier for us to reach one another. It is almost impossible to shield knowledge of our existence from people across the world. And I think that does help. And then the other thing that I'll say is that even if these movements were somehow successful, if they could somehow just like snap their finger and make every last one of us disappear, we would still be here because we'd be born again the very next day. You know, we are part of what it means to be human. We have always been here. We will always be here. There's nothing that anybody can do to, somehow eradicate us from the human DNA, from what it means to be human. And for as long as there have been human beings, there have been transgender people. I often talk about, if you look back in history, the very first work of literature, the very first work of authorship by Inhe Duana, who's often credited with being the first author because she wrote something and then signed her name. She was writing about the priesthood of Inanna, which was a group of transgender, third gender, and gender nonconforming priests. So like we are literally as old as writing itself. And I think that today people are coming to wake up to that. People are coming to realize that we are here. We're part of your existence. We're going to be here no matter what happens. So let's share the same world together. I think that in the end, whenever we can, it's going to be for the better of everybody.
Yeah, one of the big, I guess, like anthropological red pills that you could take is the realization that the anthropological evidence for the existence of essentially trans people, or, like a blanket term, I guess, in that context,
right.
goes back as long as we have written history. It's just that a lot of those records have been burned. You have a civilization where back in the olden days, only so many books or so many written records get produced. And usually they're by like scribes of the king or whatever. There's a very limited control over who gets to publish what information. Now we have the internet. It is not possible anymore. There is no government that could ever control the amount of like autobiographical information that gets thrown out onto the net. It's not doable. I don't think that's ever being sort of like rolled back. And as a consequence, now everyone's here to stay. You see everything all the time, and all of the narratives that have been tightly controlled over the course of history have unwoven. And now we see not only are there, so and so many gay and trans people, but these dynamics, the presence of those groups, can't even be unwoven from the dynamics within far right movements. This is kind of like a separate topic, but like even the super duper ultra far right, trans hating, gay hating, whatever, they're pretty gay themselves, like pretty consistently, and a lot of that would be unwritten by the record. You do previous fascist regimes, you get to like scale that back, pretend that they're all like steely jawed disciplinarians 24/7. But in reality, we're all fighting against a fundamental truth here. So I don't know. It makes me optimistic. It makes me hope for the future. I think that this current backlash will be temporary. There will be suffering, but in the long run, I think we'll win.
Absolutely. And as long as we have our allies standing with us, then we can make it through. So thank you so much for having me on. And I'm always pleased to speak with you at any time.
Absolutely. Erin Reed, writer of Erin in the Morning, where you can go and read what I'll tell you before I tell you that. Absolutely phenomenal source on all issues related to transgender rights in the United States. Thank you again. And I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you for having me on. You too. Bye.
Bye. Take care. Oh, who's that handsome devil right there? Well, that was nice, wasn't it? That was awesome. Yeah, I quite like Erin. No, I missed the Erin Reed convo. Well, thankfully, thanks to the magic of internet video, you will be able to see it again in the future. Nice. Yeah, no, Erin does phenomenal work in Erin in the Morning, and is one of the only like independent media sources that I go after. Vosh is wrong about Russian queers. There are no open queer people in public life because they're quickly suppressed and fleeing country. No. Endless optimism. You misunderstood my point. I'm not saying that queer culture is able to openly flourish in Russia. I'm saying that the existence of queer people is so omnipresent that we hear their voices ring out, even from countries where every possible political threat is made against them. I'm not making the argument that like everyone is having like pride parties everywhere, just that it's like an irrepressible element of our behavior that the internet gives. That's not very optimistic. You all want to take a hit right now? You all want to get back? What do you? Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. Maybe we should have spent this. Hey, Erin, everything's right. Yeah, everything's. That's what you people sound like. Honestly. I strongly recommend that you guys keep appraised of Erin Morin's writing. I will say, however, that don't like doom scroll. She writes quite a bit. She's a busy lady, so it's right. It's got a lot of negative news, but you're not getting an article written every time someone hosts a pride parade that goes well, if that makes any sense. Hello, Artemy. Trans support, let's go. That's pretty true.